when my husband threw a stack of signed divorce papers across the kitchen island and said, "You have 2 days to get out of this house," he thought he had completely destroyed me. His new mistress stood right behind him, wearing a triumphant smirk, convinced they had won everything: the house, the family wealth, and my dignity. Everyone in his family expected me to beg, to scream, or to hire a lawyer to fight for crumbs. But I didn't say a single word. Instead, I calmly walked over to his heavy mahogany desk, picked up the key to the multi-million-dollar family safe, placed it silently on the table, and walked out the front door. They thought I was surrendering, but they didn't know what was actually inside that safe. And when they finally opened it 48 hours later, both of their faces went completely pale. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Hughes, and at 38 years old, I learned that a 4-year marriage can be dismantled in less than 30 seconds. Julian, my husband, stood in the center of our open-concept kitchen, his arms crossed and his chin tilted upward with an air of absolute superiority. Behind him stood Vanessa, his 24-year-old assistant, wearing a silk blouse I had seen on our credit card statement 2 weeks prior. She didn't even have the decency to look away. Instead, she smirked, watching me as if I were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience being removed from her path. "You have 2 days to get out of this house," Julian said, his voice cold and completely devoid of emotion. He slapped a thick envelope onto the granite island. "The divorce papers are already signed on my end. My lawyer prepared everything. You leave with your clothes, your personal items, and nothing else." In his mind, he had backed me into a corner. For 4 years, I had quietly played the role of the supportive wife, enduring his family's subtle condescension and his growing arrogance. His family's name carried weight in our city, and Julian genuinely believed that their influence, combined with his sudden legal maneuver, would leave me frozen in panic. He expected tears. He expected me to fall to my knees, beg for a second chance, or desperately call a lawyer to plead for a monthly allowance. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye, utterly silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shed a single tear. I simply turned toward his private study, walked over to his heavy mahogany desk, and picked up the polished brass key to the multi-million-dollar family safe. Walking back into the kitchen, I set the key down on the island right beside the divorce papers, picked up my handbag, and walked out the front door. Julian thought he was throwing me to the wolves. He had no idea he had just handed me the match to light his entire empire on fire. To understand how I ended up standing in that driveway, you have to understand who I was before I became Julian Vance's wife. Having served nearly 2 decades as an officer and forensic auditor in military intelligence, I had spent my entire career uncovering hidden paper trails and financial deception. But when Julian entered my life, wrapped in the polished charm of his family's generational wealth, everything shifted. His mother made it clear early on. Vance wives didn't maintain high-profile careers. They managed households, hosted charity galas, and kept quiet. Gradually, the subtle control set in. Julian convinced me to step back from my active service role, slowly stripping away my financial independence. He gave me an allowance, but every dollar spent was questioned. If I spoke up during family dinners, his mother's sharp glare reminded me of my place. I was an outsider, brought in to play a supporting role in Julian's picture-perfect life. Then, 3 months ago, the facade cracked completely. I found a second phone hidden in Julian's briefcase. On it were hundreds of text messages with Vanessa, outlining an affair that had been going on for over a year. But it wasn't just the betrayal that made my blood run cold. It was their plan. Julian and Vanessa were discussing how to systematically drain our joint marital accounts, transfer assets into offshore shells, and stage a sudden divorce that would leave me with zero alimony. They thought I was a retired, compliant housewife who wouldn't notice. They forgot what 18 years of forensic intelligence work trained me to do. The Vance family safe wasn't just a secure box. It was a monolith of their pride. Anchored to the concrete floor inside Julian's private study, the 3-ton reinforced steel vault held the legacy of 3 generations. It stored property deeds, vintage family heirlooms, untraceable bearer bonds, and the core corporate structure of Vance Enterprises. Julian bragged constantly to his inner circle that the contents of that safe guaranteed his family's invincible future. He kept the digital combination strictly to himself, believing the physical master key sitting on his desk was useless without the code. What Julian failed to realize was that 4 years of being dismissed as a quiet, harmless housewife gave me unfettered access to every corner of that house while he was away. Over the past 90 days, my tactical background became my quietest weapon. Late at night, while Julian slept soundly believing his scheme was working, I systematically went through the safe. I didn't steal a single dollar or tear up any documents. Instead, I audited every ledger, scanned every corporate filing, and slowly untangled the massive web of financial deceit Julian had been spinning behind his family's back. He thought he was using the safe to secure his future with Vanessa. He had no idea that I had spent 3 months carefully rearranging its contents, turning his precious vault into a ticking time bomb, waiting for the exact moment he decided to open it. Leaving the house with just 2 suitcases felt strangely liberating. I rented a small, quiet motel room on the edge of town, turning off my location settings and refusing to answer the barrage of smug text messages Julian sent over the next 48 hours. He sent pictures of my remaining belongings packed in trash bags, followed by texts telling me how easy it was to replace me. I didn't reply to a single one. While I sat peacefully in that motel room, Julian and Vanessa were already popping champagne. According to a quiet heads-up from our former housekeeper, Julian had invited his mother and a few close friends over to celebrate his official freedom. Vanessa was already walking around the master bedroom, planning expensive renovations and acting like the new lady of the manor. They were so blinded by their sudden victory that they didn't care to ask why I had walked away without a fight. They assumed my silence was submission, a sign of a broken woman who knew she had been outplayed. As the 48-hour clock slowly ticked down, Julian gathered his family's corporate lawyer for the final ritual of his triumph. He was eager to open the safe, present the untouched family bonds to Vanessa, and officially close the chapter on our marriage. He picked up the brass key I had left on the kitchen island, dialed in his combination, and pulled open the heavy steel door. The massive steel door of the vault swung open with a heavy, satisfying click. Julian stood tall, a self-satisfied grin plastered across his face as Vanessa leaned in close, eager to catch her first glimpse of the legendary Vance fortune. Sitting right beside them was the family's longtime corporate attorney, pen in hand, ready to catalog the assets and finalize the transfer documents. Julian reached inside, expecting to pull out the familiar velvet pouches of family heirlooms, the stack of untraceable bearer bonds, and the original title deeds to the multi-million-dollar estate. But as his hands touched the top shelf, his grin faltered. The gold and deeds were gone. In their place were neatly organized, color-coded folders stacked high, accompanied by a thick bound binder labeled with a bold red seal, Forensic Audit and Tax Evasion Analysis. Julian's face went instantly pale. "What is this?" Vanessa muttered, her eager smile fading into confusion. The attorney reached forward and opened the first folder. As his eyes scanned the pages, his face drained of all color. Inside weren't property titles. They were copies of predatory personal loans Julian had secretly taken out in the company's name over the past 18 months. To fund his lavish lifestyle with Vanessa and cover massive offshore investment losses, Julian had mortgaged the family home to the hilt and pledged Vance Enterprises as collateral for high-interest private debt. He had hidden these liabilities inside the safe, intending to blame the financial strain on me during the divorce. But I hadn't stolen anything. Using the evidence I gathered during my late-night audits, I had simply submitted the original fraudulent deeds to the federal tax authorities and the board of directors the day before. What I left in the safe was my masterstroke. Formal legal notices of non-guarantorship, proving that every single cent of that toxic debt was tied exclusively to Julian's personal signature. The key I left on the kitchen island wasn't a surrender. It was the key that locked him inside his own financial trap. The silence inside the study was deafening as the full reality of the situation hit the room. The attorney slowly closed the binder, looked up at Julian, and took a step back. "Julian," the lawyer said, his voice cold and trembling. "By serving Catherine with those specific divorce papers and executing that eviction contract without a global financial settlement, you triggered the sole indemnity clause. You separated her entirely from your financial estate before these liabilities were declared." Julian grabbed the lawyer's jacket, his voice turning shrill. "What are you talking about? Fix it. She took the money." "She didn't take a dime of corporate money," the attorney snapped, pulling away. "She isolated your personal fraud. The moment she submitted those audit reports to the authorities yesterday, the Federal Tax Enforcement Agency froze all corporate and personal accounts tied to your name. As of 2 hours ago, you are personally liable for over $4 million in defaulted loans, and the house is facing immediate foreclosure." Vanessa stood frozen, staring at Julian as if he were a complete stranger. The expensive lifestyle, the promised penthouse in the city, the luxury cars. It had all been built on a house of cards that had just collapsed. "You told me you were rich!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "You told me she was the one dragging you down." "Vanessa, wait, let me explain," Julian pleaded, reaching out for her. "Don't touch me," she yelled, backing out of the room. Within 20 minutes, Vanessa had thrown her belongings into her designer bags and stormed out of the house, leaving Julian completely alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a charming coastal cottage, watching the waves crest against the shore. Using my savings and my extensive background in forensic accounting, I officially launched my own independent financial investigation firm. The peace I felt in that small town was something money could never buy. A quiet confidence born from knowing I had fought for my dignity and won. Julian's world, on the other hand, shattered completely. Forced to sell the luxury family home at a massive loss to cover immediate penalties, he was stripped of his position at Vance Enterprises by the board of directors. With his credit ruined and severe tax debts hanging over his head, he ended up living in a cramped rental apartment, working a middle management job just to meet his monthly court-mandated repayment plan. His family's legacy of generational pride was reduced to a public lesson in corporate fraud. Looking back, the moment Julian threw those divorce papers at me was supposed to be my breaking point. He thought taking away my home would leave me powerless. But true strength isn't about the wealth you hold. It's about knowing your worth when people try to make you feel worthless. I survived by staying calm, relying on my training, and letting arrogance destroy itself. Now, I'm curious about you listening to my story. If you were put in my shoes, would you have walked away quietly, or would you have fought back immediately? Comment below and let me know your thoughts. And while you're here, make sure to check out the 2 channel favorite stories appearing on your screen right now. They are packed with twists you won't see coming. Thank you so much for watching.